Ladies and gentlemen, welcome tonight to this forum for the Bucksport Town Council candidates race. My name is the Reverend Stephen York. This is a nonpartisan event, and I do not live in Bucksport. I live in Verona Island, so I don't have any candidate up here. I'm neutral, which is, I guess, one of the reasons I was asked to do this. I serve as the minister of the Elm Street Congregational Church and as the minister of the Stonington, Maine United Methodist Church. Tonight, the candidates are all here except for Glenn Findley, who advised that he would be out of town because of a prior commitment. The candidates by lot have chosen the following order. Mr. Key will answer questions first, followed by Mr. Bissett, followed by Mr. Harlan, followed by Mr. Ormsby, and finally by Mr. Morrison. That will be the order throughout the night. We're asking that you would refrain from interrupting the candidates or making comments, either positive or negative, and we'll ask also that you save your applause for the end of the forum. To begin, this is how the program will go this evening. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to introduce himself and his candidacy for the council. Secondly, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to respond to 3 prior determined questions, and then 2 minutes to take questions that have been submitted in writing, and we're only taking questions in writing tonight, so if you have a question, Don is collecting them and passing them on. I think that's it. It's important to have civil conversations and public discourse, and the future of Bucksport is important. And each one of these candidates are taking their time to run for office, either for re-election or for election for the first time. And so we welcome the candidates. They are identified. Most of you know them anyways, but their name is in front of them. This is being taped for local television and will be shown repeatedly throughout the next few days or so. And I understand the schedule for this will be published in the Bucksport Enterprise. And so we're going to begin now, and in the order in which you have selected yourselves, we'll begin with Mr. Key, and you have 3 minutes to introduce yourself and talk about why you're running for the council.
I didn't select myself to run first. I drew the short straw. I would rather have spoken later. I want to thank Dawn for putting this together. I think it's a great idea to get together so you can hear, and it's great that the other members of the community are going to be able to hear it and see it also. I'm the only incumbent. I've served 3 terms on the town council. I want to thank the citizens of Bucksport for that, and I'm seeking a 4th term and asking for your vote on Tuesday, November 6th. It's too bad that there aren't any women running. I know all of the candidates and current town council have tried to encourage women to run. We're still encouraging women to run. We could use a different viewpoint of sorts on the council, so I encourage the people in this room to think about it. It's been one of the greatest pleasures of my life, and certainly of my public life. The people, after the last general election, the people of Bucksport were asked to let us know whether they wanted full-term, full-service representation. That is, that they want a paid police department, that they want a paid fire department. And I think wisely, realizing that seconds can mean a lot in both those situations, they told us overwhelmingly that they wanted to be a full-service kind of town. When the mill closed, we immediately lost 40% of our tax base. As you know, 40% is a pretty big number. Current mill rate of 16.3 mil has been reduced by the council for the town manager for the 3rd year in a row. I'd like to take just a moment to say what a great town manager I think we have, and I would assume that the other councilors feel the same way. that 16.3 mill rate is lower than Belfast or Ellsworth, which are comparably sized towns in the area. There was a rainy day fund of $8 million when the mill closed. We still have $6.6 million of that remaining, I'm happy to say, after 4 years. As we know, Maine Maritime Academy is coming in. Whole Oceans is ready to open shop, proving to me and hopefully to you that we are a business-friendly community is more than just a slogan that we don't pay attention to, because I think it's some of the services of the council that encourage these new businesses to come in. And the RSU reports that we have 45 new students in schools this year, in the grade schools. That means young families. That's great, and we like to see that continue. I think that it would not be untowards. Money is always an issue. If people, it's easy to say cut, don't spend so much, but I think it's fair for this audience and the people of Bucksport to know where you would cut and how much, so that they can determine whether or not that's the direction they want to go. I'm asking you on Tuesday, November 6th, to vote, to take a couple friends, and it'll be your choice as for whom you vote, but get out and vote. It's a hard-fought right. Exercise it. Make yourself feel good. Thank you very much, and I'll appreciate your vote on the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. Key. Just as a point, I want to make sure everyone is able to hear. And, okay, there are a few seats over here if people want to move, and I'm going to ask that all of you project your voices so that everyone can hear. If anyone's having problems hearing, just give me a high sign, and I will remind our candidates tonight. Mr. Bissonette is next.
Hi, good evening. I also thank the Enterprise as well as the RSU for hosting this evening. This is great, and I'm glad there are so many people here considering Game 1 is tonight. I didn't think there would be that many people. My name is Paul Bissonette. I've lived in Bucksport for the last 20 years since I graduated from the University of Maine. I have been active in the community. I was on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and then I was on the Bucksport School Board for 9 years, and the RSU Board for 1 year from 2000 to 2010. I was chair of the Bucksport School Board for 2 terms, and I was also the chair of the RSU Board when it started back in 2010. I've also been active in Little League and Boy Scouts in Bucksport, so I'll use my coach and Boy Scout voice, leader voice tonight as opposed to my school board voice, so everyone can hear me.
Turn it up.
Okay. Everyone's asking me why I'm running, and I'll tell you why I'm running. I think this is the part where I have to speak about myself. I have a reputation for being good at getting people to work together. The joke that I always tell is I was captain of my high school baseball team, but I certainly wasn't the best player. I just happened to be the one that got everybody to play well together. I have experience working with town leaders. I have experience working with RSU budgets as well as RSU leadership. I was on the committee that hired our present superintendent. I've negotiated contracts for both the school board and the RSU, labor contracts. I've hired administrators. I'm patient. I seek to hear opposing viewpoints. I'm not afraid of that. I actually welcome it. I believe that it's important to hear other viewpoints, and I don't think compromise is a bad word. I am a collaborator, and I am deliberate when making decisions. I like facts, and I like to hear as many sides of the story as I possibly can. I learned in being on the school board one very valuable lesson, and that is you will never make everyone happy. What you have to do is make the best decision you can with as much information as possible. I am good at making decisions, and I own them, whether they're good or bad. I would appreciate your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Next in order is Mr. Harlan.
Hello everyone, my name is Dan Harlan, for those of you that don't know me. I'm a native to Maine and 20-plus year resident of Bucksport. I attended and graduated from this school. I went on from here, got an associate's degree in criminal justice from Beale College in Bangor, and that led to me being a patrolman for this town. I was a patrolman in the community from April of 2004. I started as part-time and ended up as full-time officer right through to July of 2017. During that time, I served as a union steward and was able to negotiate a contract with the town of Bucksport, and that's kind of what got me interested in running for town office. So I'm now currently working with the Hancock County Sheriff's Office, which is one of the reasons I'm sitting here today, because obviously I was ineligible until I made the move. While working here, I did plenty of community events. We did Guns and Hoses, and I've always enjoyed working with this community, being an active member of it. And my wife had a business on Main Street. My children go to school here. My youngest had a genetic disorder, and this town really came together for us and helped take care. So I want to give back for everything that was given to me. There's a lot of different things that I want to do if given the opportunity. I want to help our Main Street be bolstered. I want to help our marina. I want to help encourage with the mill site. All these things are very important, and I think will continue to draw people to our community. And that's what makes our community special, is the fact that we have great people. So I appreciate your vote, and I will bring common sense decision-making and can be an asset to the community as I once was, with the ability to serve again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan. I'm getting some signals that people can't hear real well, so again, I'm going to implore you to speak up. Just pretend you're preaching somewhere. All right. The next speaker is Mr. Ormsby.
Hello, everybody. First, I want to say that I think that as being on the town council, one of the most important things that we can be are learners. I'm going to go through and just tell you a little bit about myself so you can learn about me first. Again, my name's Dan Ormsby. I'm really excited about running for town council. I want to bring up my family. First, my family's my rock. My wife, Lisa, is a Tech 3 at Bucksport Middle School. My daughter's a varsity captain cheerleader at Bucksport High School, and she currently is in the law enforcement program at HCTC, which I'm very proud of. And my parents are here in the second row back tonight. I want to be able to get on the town council to give back to the town that has given so much to me as I've grown up here. I grew up in Bucksport. I went through the Bucksport school system. I really enjoyed my time. I have lifelong mentors and friends who some of them are right here today in this room. I like school so much, I decided I wanted to become a teacher. I continued that passion for education. After high school graduation, I went on to get my bachelor's degree at Springfield College, and from 2000 to 2004. And then I got my first job, K-12, Islesboro. So if anybody knows island life, it's quite interesting. I was also an administrator out there for my first teaching job, so I was also the athletic administrator. With all the trials and tribulations as a young administrator, had to do a lot of things. My ambition had to balance budgets. I had to handle personnel, and being a brand new teacher was quite a mountain to climb right off the bat. In 2004, I got a position teaching at Ellsworth. I had a 7-year stay there where I also earned my master's degree in education. This is where I really truly grew as an educator. I started to take on administrative roles within the school system, and I really saw that I really enjoyed that part. Then after a successful time at Ellsworth, my dream came true, and I started to coach and teach in my hometown. So I was the teacher here at Miles Lane School for the last 3 years, and I was the lead teacher, which is an unglorified assistant principal. My assistant principal at the time, Christina Ellis, helped mold my skills as an administrator, and I realized it was time for me to move on and become an actual administrator myself. This past June, I was hired at RSU 20 as the dean of students, or the assistant principal, and the K-12 attendance coordinator. This position is fast-paced. There's a lot that goes with it, keeping track of the personnel, school budgets. the stuff that I get a chance to talk about here correlates closely to what I'm going to have to do on the town council. I'm going to have to learn. I'm going to have to make up specific opinions about different ways that the town council is running and what direction they're going. I'll be a driven force for our economic development activities and create and retain jobs. I'll listen to the townspeople and spend money where it needs to be spent and save money where it needs to be saved. And I'll work as a team with the other councilors to promote and advance Bucksport. November 6th, please vote for me.
Thank you, Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Morrison.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming here tonight. Thank you, folks, for having us and getting this together. I have been for 4 years attending every council meeting I could attend. I've attended most of the planning board meetings in the last couple of years. I went for a little while as a member of the planning board, and during that time I learned a lot about how that works. I've watched the council very closely. I'm opposed to the way that they treat the codes for the most part. I'd like to see them a little more taken care of. And when they're paying attention to the codes, I'd rather that they would leave them as they are, as our people in the past have written them and left them there. And it seems to be that if it doesn't fit the present council, they want to change them. I'd like to see that change. I'd like to see those codes kept. It's important that that's what rules us, not the council, those codes. And I think that we should be watching over that a little bit closer. The council at the present time, it's going to be changing a lot. There's a couple of people that aren't going to run. There's one that is going to consider staying on. And I think that if we put some fresh faces on there, we'll see some fresh answers to things that aren't being taken care of. And I think that the people of the town need to get more involved, and we need to be informed much more than we are at the present time. Thank you. Vote for me November 6th, please.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. There are 3 questions that we're going to address one at a time, but so that you can frame your answers accordingly and not sort of spill over, I'm going to give you an idea of what the 3 questions are, so you can be thinking about them. In teaching, this is called front-loading, right? And then I'm going to ask you to not only speak up so everyone can hear you, but also to limit your answer to the specific question that we're addressing. So the 3 questions or topics we're going to cover in this next section of the forum tonight. The first question is going to be asking you, what do you consider to be the most important issue facing Bucksport? That means you give one specific answer to that, not several. The second question we're going to be asking you tonight is, what do you want to see the town council accomplish if you're elected during the next 3 years? So we are looking for you to give us 3 specific goals, all right? And then the third question will be relevant to, what do you consider the council's top 3 spending priorities to be? And in that, do you see any room for cutbacks in municipal spending? So that's where we're heading next, gentlemen. We're going to continue in the order of your selected lots tonight. So the first question, and I'll repeat the question each time so that each one of the candidates is clear as to where I am on these questions. So going to Mr. Key, and each of you will have a chance to respond before we move to the next question. Mr. Key, what do you consider to be the most important issue facing Bucksport today?
When the mill closed, one of the things that happened that I never saw happen in Bucksport before was what a coalition of people that came together. People who were natives, people who had been here a few years, people who had been here for an intermediary number of years. They came together in all sorts of ways with heart and soul. They came together with various groups, and as a result of that, Bucksport very quickly came out of the temporary doldrums with our no longer being a mill town and losing 40% of our tax base. So I think the most important issue is to keep that momentum going and to make sure that we're able to utilize all the groups so that all of the citizens of Bucksport are heard and have a chance to participate.
Thank you. The question now goes to Mr. Bissonette. Mr. Bissonette. Mr. Bissonette, what do you consider the most important issue facing Bucksport today?
The most important issue facing Bucksport to me is related to the former mill site and what happens moving there and the offshoots of that. Specifically, I think the questions that Bucksport needs to answer are what type of industry or businesses will go there, what else will that bring to the town, good and bad. How do we attract the right businesses to the mill site and the rest of Bucksport, and taking into account the priorities that have been set forth by some of the coalitions that Mr. Key referenced. Whether it's the ADAPT group, whether it's Bucksport Next and the comprehensive plan, whether it's Main Street Bucksport and Heart and Soul, these are all groups, again, that, as Mr. Key illustrated, have come together and have all done a lot of work towards their priorities for Bucksport moving forward. And lastly, how does the development of that site make the rest of Bucksport better? So all of the things that offshoot off of what happens with the mill site going forward, to me, is the most important thing that's facing Bucksport right now.
Thank you, Mr. Bissonette. The question now goes to Mr. Harlan. Mr. Harlan, what do you consider the most important issue facing Bucksport today?
I agree with the mill site is a large issue for us and the development of that. I'm excited by the prospects of the whole Oceans salmon farm coming and the fact that we potentially have a school facility with Maine Maritime Academy coming to start training. Now that may not help us with our tax base, but it's going to bring people and stimulate our economy, basically Main Street businesses, and I think that's very important to the town to keep everybody on Main Street going, and with the whole Oceans coming in to really help with the tax base and maybe give everybody that's a little bit of relief there. So I'm excited by the development. I think that's going very well, and I hope it continues and we can make more of it.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan. I just want to remind the candidates that there is a timekeeper holding up a sign, and these questions are limited to 2-minute responses. So we'll continue now. The question now goes to Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Ormsby, what do you consider the most important issue facing Bucksport today?
Well, I hate to be a broken record with everybody else that's up here, but first, I think that the town council and our economic development director working as a cohesive team in order to bring Whole Oceans in, bring MMA in, and so with those companies coming in, bring more people into the town, bring businesses into the town, but I think it all comes back to our economic development. If that is supported, and the people that are driving that are supported, then we'll be able to do more of those things. We'll be able to bring in Whole Oceans, be able to bring in MMA.
Thank you, Mr. Ormsby. The question now goes to Mr. Morrison. Mr. Morrison, what do you consider the most important issue facing Bucksport today?
I'm going to say that it's the lack of unification of the community. I think that all these things that they're talking about and the need for having these jobs is one thing. But my impression is from going door to door, talking to people, that most of the major issues that are being discussed aren't even something that the people out there in the other parts of the town are even thinking about. They don't even have an idea what you're talking about when you ask them about an issue that's going on here. So I think that we probably should be getting some more information out to the people in the town. Maybe they'll be a little less apt to want to sit back and not speak up on situations that they think should be spoke up on.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. We're now going to go to question number 2 in the round. And the question again will go to Mr. Key. Mr. Key, what would you like to see the town council accomplish in the next 3 years listing your 3 most important goals, sir.
Well, being a broken record, but keeping the momentum that we have and having the people work together, continuing that, a reasonable use of the money, and there is a lot of money to be reasonably used. I mean, when you look at this, we're in far better financial shape than other towns of our size, and Bucksport may be in this part of the country. And I'm talking about $6.6 million in the rainy day fund. I'm talking about $300,000 in the TIF fund to help businesses, and I'm talking about the $200,000 in reserves in the education reserve. So there's a lot of money involved. It needs to be spent wisely for the benefit of all the citizens. I think those are the 3 most important goals: keeping the people working together, reasonable use of the money, and keeping the taxes low.
Thank you, Mr. Key. The question now goes to Mr. Bissonnette. Mr. Bissonnette, if elected, what would you like to see the town council accomplish in the next 3 years? And please list your 3 most important goals, sir.
Okay. My 3 goals are as follows. The first would be for the town council to focus its efforts on bringing the public's vision for Bucksport to fruition. I think that over the course of the last 5 years, certainly since the mill has closed and we've had to hire a new town manager, that's required. It's almost been a necessity for the council to, in some fashion or another, be in the weeds, so to speak. As we move out of that, it's time for the council to start looking at a lot of the work, again, that's been done by the groups that have come together that have already been mentioned, and start to put some of its own vision forward as well. That really is strategic planning, and that's what I'd like to see the council move towards, and empower the council, empower the team of people that we have in place for administrators to execute that strategic plan and hold them to a very high standard. As part of that, the third priority that I would have would be the setting of priorities. Priorities are important. They're part of a strategic plan, and they are reflected in policies that are created, they are reflected in budgets, and they are reflected in the work that the council does. Priorities that certainly can be adjusted when life happens, because life happens, we've learned, unfortunately. But priorities that the council can use as it and the administrators of the town move forward. And that can be easily communicated to everyone in town. And then, of course, just moving forward by then making decisions and making those things happen. But those would be my 3.
Thank you, Mr. Bissonnette. The question now goes to Mr. Harlan. Mr. Harlan, what would you like to see the town council accomplish during the next 3 years? And please list for us your 3 most important goals.
I'm going to say the support of the mill site again. That's obviously very important to the growth of our town. I think that helps with the second goal of mine, which would be to see Main Street and Marina have support. I think the Marina is an excellent place with, it's got room to grow. We have a beautiful waterfront. We have beautiful waterfront walkway, and we have a great Main Street that needs more support. And I think that vacationers and people can use the facilities at the Marina, and there should be more of that. I also think that we need to worry about resource management. The town owns a lot of land and a lot of equipment, and I know that some stuff we buy new, some stuff we have a great mechanic in town. He does a good job. He has certainly repurposed things, and the police department has a military surplus program that they acquire. They acquired 2 side-by-sides from, and that's great. And that's made possible by able to be repurposed by the mechanic that we have. I'm curious as to some of the things that we lease some equipment when we could, when we have such a great asset in our town mechanic. So I'd like to look into that. As far as police and fire, they do a lot of grants, but there are obviously times where new trucks are due and new cruisers are due, and I just want to look at all that and make sure everything's on the up and up.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan. The question now goes to Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Ormsby, what would you like to see the town council accomplish during the next 3 years? And please list for us your 3 most important goals, sir.
I think getting on the council, I think we need to really take a hard look at where our spending is and where our spending isn't. I think that's really important, that if we're gonna pay for certain things within town, that we really look across the board where our money's being spent. Number 2, expand. I always say this, we need to expand our local businesses and give them the support that they need in order to expand. And doing that, we are able to bring in Holotions, we are able to bring in MMA, we are able to help the downtown businesses. On offshoot of that, the better they do, the better we do. And then on top of that, using our local businesses throughout. So our school system, are we getting our materials from our town? Are we using our town people to do the work that we need? And the third one, I think we really need to cut back or really take a hard look at the regulations that we have. I think we are massively over-regulated. And it's just expanding and expanding and expanding. And so every meeting you go to, there's another regulation propped onto somebody else, so that it's harder and harder and harder for people to want to come here and open a business. Instead, they'll take off and they'll go to Orland or they'll go somewhere else. So I think that's really important.
Thank you, Mr. Ormsby. The question now goes to Mr. Morrison. Mr. Morrison, what do you consider, sir, the council's top 3 spending what would you like to see the town accomplish during the next 3 years? And please list your 3 most important goals.
Well, number 1, I think we should follow our codes. And I think if there are too many codes, much as Dan just said, I think we probably should cut back on some of them codes. It seems like every meeting that you go to, there's at least 1 or 2 codes that are being discussed and either being regulated further, or they're just being eliminated completely. I think that if we're going to have codes in front of us that people put there at one time or another, we probably ought to stick by them. Number 2, again, I think that the communication lines between the people and the town government are pretty shaky. We have a good newspaper that puts out the information that he's given, but I think if it comes directly from the town government to the people, there's the chief sitting there. He gives us a nice report every month, every meeting. I think that should go out to the people. I think we should see that. I think everybody should know what is going on there. And I think that we have some pretty good assets in this town. In our nice trails that we have a nice walkway down on the riverfront. We have all kinds of nice freshwater lakes. I think they're being underutilized. I think our trails should be advertised more clearly. I think if people are going to leave here and go to down to the park and to walk on trails, why can't we have trails here that they want to walk on also? We got just as good a scenery and just as good trails as they have there.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. We're now going to question number 3. And the question falls now to Mr. Key. Mr. Key, what do you consider, the council's top 3 spending priorities? And do you see any room for cutbacks in municipal spending? And speak to that with any kind of specific that you could, sir.
Well, I started out saying that the last poll that I know of that was taken was after the last general election, where there was a pretty good turnout. The people were very clear they wanted to remain a full-service community. That is, with paid police, paid fire, where seconds can make a big difference. And other places, I think that we need to, I think sometimes we buy new material and new things a little too quickly. I would like to comment, too, on regulations that we should have a rule that for every regulation we pass, we ought to have to take 2 off the books. I've always thought that was a good idea, and I've said so on the council. But as far as spending is concerned, I think that would help a little bit with spending. I think that the spending priorities, I think we can't forget about our staff and probably 130 to 150 town workers. I'm not sure of the exact number. I think they need to be paid a fair wage because we want to keep good people. I think we are keeping good people, and I think we need to continue to do that. And again, to encouraging new business, we have a small loan. I think it's what, 25,000, Rich? I think we ought to, that we give to new businesses starting out. I think we ought to find a way to increase that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Key. The question now goes to Mr. Bissonnette. Mr. Bissonnette, what do you consider the council's top 3 spending priorities, and do you see any room for cutbacks in municipal spending?
Sure. I think the 3 top priorities, and I'll be honest, I've read through the ADAPT plan, I've read through the comprehensive plan put together with Bucksport Next, I've read through Heart and Soul's priorities, I've read through Main Street Bucksport. I've lifted a lot of these from there because they speak to the voice of the people who live here. First, I think we need to encourage development, whether that's economic development that brings people to live here and do business here, as again reflected in both the ADAPT plan and the comprehensive plan. We need to not just encourage businesses to come here and people to come here, but support the businesses that are already here and have been here for generations, as well as the people that have lived here for generations. And we need to account for them as well. But we do need to have the services that bring people here and keep people here that are efficient and don't break the bank at the same time. And I think the third priority, spending priority, should be to market Bucksport and to market Bucksport effectively. Have a strategic plan for the types of businesses we want here in Bucksport and for where we want them. And that will attract people to buy homes and send their children to school here. Budgets always reflect scrutiny. To me, budgets are priorities. Budgets deserve annual review. And town council should be able to present a budget to the taxpayers and be able to go through that budget for the taxpayers and identify what those priorities are. So there are always opportunities to examine every line of the budget, and it just boils down to what the priorities are for the council, but ultimately for the taxpayers of Bucksport.
Anything on spending cuts?
I don't have any ideas for spending cuts right now at this time, but what I will say is that I will always, as I did on the school committee, will scrutinize budgets and make sure that they reflect the priorities of both the council as well as the taxpayers.
Thank you. The question now goes to Mr. Harlan. Mr. Harlan, what do you consider, sir, to be the top 3 spending priorities, and do you see any room for cutbacks in municipal spending?
So my 3 priorities would be Main Street, obviously. I've said that many times throughout this. I think Main Street needs, our Main Street needs help. I think it can help draw businesses here. I think there can be less fees, less red tape to open a business here. I am speaking from the experience of my wife when she owned a hair salon on Main Street. I think that spending priorities are for people, to keep good people. It's definitely, there needs to be some money available for that. As far as public safety is concerned, there's difficulties throughout the state, as I'm sure anyone that's looked in the paper has seen. They're in hiring public safety, fire, and police. So that's a concern of mine. Obviously, we have good people in Bucksport. We want to keep good people in Bucksport. Maintenance of equipment, resource management. Again, I think we can save some money with some of the projects that may not be totally necessary. And I also think we can save money with, instead of buying new equipment, continue with having it repaired. I know that there can be cuts based on some funding saved based on, I read that there's lots of parking lots and the like going in. I'd rather see that money spent on the actual main street rather than parking lots in behind. There is quite a bit of money that goes to that on a yearly basis. That's just a concern of mine that I would like to look into, but obviously without being part of it as of yet.
Time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan. The question now goes to Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Ormsby, what do you, sir, consider to be the council's top three spending priorities? And do you see any room for cutbacks in municipal spending?
Well, as we're sitting here and I'm going through and I'm thinking about this question, the top 3 spending that we already have, I feel like we have to spend a little bit of money to make money. First, we'll always have good schools. I mean, that's going to be a major spending for us. Again, I'm a broken record, but I feel like this is one of the most underutilized thing is our economic development, and as part of that, our regulations. But we have a marina down on the waterfront that is one of the most amazing areas in the state of Maine. And I think we've underutilized it. I think that we have, so much expanse that we could put down there on the waterfront, on the docks. And it's just something that we haven't done as much with. I think it's starting to expand, but we need to do a little bit more with that. As far as our cutbacks, I'm not really sure of what cutbacks we should make right now. I think that's part of a team as the town council gets together. We sit down together and figure out what's going to be the best place to look for cutbacks and where we need to. And I think that's the power of the town government working together. So,
Thank you, Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Morrison, the question to you is, what do you consider the council's top three spending priorities, and do you see any room for cutbacks in municipal spending?
Thank you. My first obligation, I think, would be to the people that are actually forking out the money for us to have a budget. I think that we probably ought to be giving the services to the people that we're charging them a lot of money, fees for different things and so on and so forth. I think these are services. I think that they should be given to the people. I think that we got to do something about our infrastructure, our roads. We've got to see what we can do about getting the state to stop alienating us further and further every year with one thing or another for a project they're putting millions of dollars into, and it's just alienating us further. I think that we need to separate our needs from our wants and purchase the things that we need rather than the things we want. I think that it's nice that we get these good God. Lost my train. Sorry about that. And as far as cuts go, I don't think we need to really cut anything. I think we need to stop expanding. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Morrison. There are 2 more sections to this forum tonight. The next section is going to be questions that have been written, and I don't know if others have come in or not, but questions that have been written and submitted to the moderator. And then the final section to the candidates is that each of you will be given 2 minutes to make closing remarks at the very end of this. So we're now going to shift to written questions that have been submitted to the moderator, and we will go through them. You will have 2 minutes again to respond to the specific question. And then the final segment of this forum this evening will be where each of you, in the order in which you have chosen your lots, to once again make a closing statement for 2 minutes duration. Thank you very much. The first question and it will go to Mr. Key. What is your take on saving Wilson Hall?
That's a very good question. You know, we hate to see buildings disappear from the landscape, but we've already put a fair amount of money into Wilson Hall, and I know this is a great, the community's pretty well split over this from what I've heard. But I'll tell you that I'm getting a little tired of pumping money into Wilson Hall unless we can find some grant money or somebody, some big donor who's willing to take it and make something out of it. So basically, for me, the string's running out on Wilson Hall. But I'm hopeful that there'll be some new proposals and we might be able to save it, but I don't see them on the horizon right now.
Thank you, Mr. Key. The question now goes to Mr. Bissonette. Mr. Bissonette, what is your take on saving Wilson Hall?
In my when I introduced myself, I mentioned that I moved back to Bucksport after graduating from the university 20 years ago.
Speak up.
Oh, yep, I graduated, after I graduated 20 years ago, I moved back to Bucksport, and I remember moving back to Bucksport and hearing about what we were going to do about Wilson Hall, and that was 20 years ago this summer. And without attaching judgment to this, I'll say that I'm honestly, as anyone who knows me will tell you, I am a big fan of history. I'm a big fan of history of this town, but I also think that we've been strung along on Wilson Hall for far too long. And I think it's time for a decision to be made about Wilson Hall. There have been a number of great on paper proposals made, and we hear all kinds of use for Wilson Hall. And this is the part where I make a decision and say, I've had enough of hearing about Wilson Hall, and if we can't find a productive use for it soon, and I would even venture a timeline to say within probably a year, that it's time to consider what we do about Wilson Hall moving forward, and seriously consider how much more money we have to put into Wilson Hall, considering that the money that's being put into Wilson Hall right now is to keep it from becoming a further liability to the town.
Thank you, Mr. Bissonette. Mr. Harlan, the question goes to you. What is your take on saving Wilson Hall?
Well, I agree with the liability aspect of it. I certainly know that the town, I've been in that building. It's a neat building. It's a historic building, but at some point, when we are, as a town, responsible for it, and it's right next door to a residential rental facilities there, that's a concern. We've certainly chased a lot of children out of there over the years. I think that it should be advertised as much as possible, and without coming to a decision on it shortly, maybe move to get rid of the Wilson Hall before someone gets hurt or killed.
All right, the question now goes to Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Ormsby, what is your take, sir, on saving Wilson Hall?
I think that we need to take as much historical stuff, for lack of a better words, off of it, and then I think we need to tear it down. I think the bell tower could come off. We could save that. I'm sure there's some other relics inside, but I think it needs to come down. I think that over the years, there's been a massive sucking sound coming from that area, and it's been the money for our taxpayers going into it. So,
thank you, Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Morrison, what is your take on saving Wilson Hall?
Well, let me say first of all that I'm not even sure who Wilson was. And I don't know if anybody else is, because I haven't really got a firm answer on that. But I did go around the town with a handwritten little petition to ask what people thought, whether they thought we should save Wilson Hall, whether we should spend town money on Wilson Hall, or what they thought. For the most part, I found that most people really didn't have an idea of trying to keep it. They didn't think that spending the town money was the thing to do. And I also found that those people that didn't know what Wilson Hall was had no opinion either way. And there was also a group that said, where can I donate? So there are some people that do have an interest. And I think that if a major person in the town decides they want to try to save it, then great. But take it out of the hands of the town. Turn it over to them, let them have it, put it on the tax roll so that we can make something with it. And I cite a man in Holton who decided that the clock tower up there needed to be fixed. He undertook it upon himself to go ahead and start having his fund drives and bake sales, whatnot. He accomplished it by himself. And it was a matter of the community getting together and taking care of a project. That's where I am with it, is that if there is an individual that wants to take it over, fine. If not, then I think it probably is time to get rid of it because it's a hazard.
All right, thank you, candidates. We're now going to move to another question. The next two questions are going to be about marijuana. The first question is going to be about medical marijuana, and the second question is going to be about retail sale of marijuana in Bucksport. So that's where we're heading next. I'm going to begin with the question pertinent to medical marijuana. The question is going to go to Mr. Key. Here's the question. Seeing that opiates are a problem in our state and we are seeking to grow our own local economy, what are your views, Mr. Key, regarding the sale of medical marijuana for verified patients requiring it?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I said, and you'll never hear a lawyer make a shorter statement than that.
Thank you, Mr. Key. That's got to go down as the shortest sermon I've heard lately. The question now goes to Mr. Bissonnette. Mr. Bissonnette, saying that opiates are a problem in our state and we're seeking to grow our own local economy, what are your views regarding the sale of medical marijuana for verified patients requiring it?
I support it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bissonnette. Mr. Harlan, saying that opiates are a problem in our state and we are seeking to grow our local economy. What are your views regarding the sale of medical marijuana for verified patients requiring it?
I have no problems if a doctor is going to prescribe marijuana to somebody. I mean, the state has already said you can have it legally without a prescription. So, I mean, the sale of medical marijuana, that's up to your doctor, so it doesn't matter to me. I mean,
I think the point will become distinct. There's some controversy in towns as to medical marijuana versus marijuana sales in communities for other purposes, for recreation, let's say. The question now goes to Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Ormsby, saying that opiates are a problem in our state and we're seeking to grow our local economy. What are your views, sir, regarding the sale of medical marijuana for verified patients requiring it?
So if I had said no, then that would be regulating, more regulations on businesses coming into town. I feel like we should definitely do it. The more money and more businesses we have coming into town, that's better for the town.
You're speaking about medical marijuana?
Yep.
Thank you, sir. The question now goes to Mr. Morrison. Mr. Morrison, seeing that opiates are a problem in our state and we are seeking to grow our local economy, what are your views, sir, regarding the sale of medical marijuana for verified patients requiring it?
I love my daughter. She has a medical marijuana sales business over on the island, and I'm all for her having it there.
What about in Bucksport?
I'm all for it anywhere.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, when you said the island, I don't know whether you were trying to send it my way.
Sure, you could throw a football from here to my daughter's house.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is a follow-up question regarding marijuana. Again, we'll begin with Mr. Key. What are your views regarding the retail sale of marijuana in the town? I'm inferring from this question that it is about recreational use of marijuana, business establishments selling marijuana.
My recollection is that the council considered this not long ago, within the last year or two. And the council decided, and I think with me voting in the affirmative, that I was against it. And I did that because I don't think marijuana is any more harmful of a drug than alcohol. Matter of fact, I think alcohol is a lot more abused than marijuana is. But by the same token, I felt that the vast majority of the citizens in Bucksport did not want the retail sale, and I thought that's the way I should vote.
I'm going to repeat your answer because I'm getting body language there. What you said, I think, sir, was that you voted against retail sale at a council meeting in the past, and that would be your position now?
That's correct. That is correct.
Has everyone heard that? Did everyone hear that answer? Mr. Key is weighing in against retail sale of marijuana. All right, we're now going to Mr. Bissonnette. Mr. Bissonnette, what are your views regarding the retail sale of marijuana in Bucksport?
While certainly supportive of what is already in place, I would have to say that, again, supportive of it. I can also be open-minded. I am of the inclination that
You're going to need to speak up. I'm getting a signal.
I certainly am inclined to believe that the town council, unless there is vast public opposition, which I would assume would be voiced to the council, shouldn't be in the business of regulating that type of thing, or one vice, if you want to call it, against the other. And so certainly supportive of what's on the books now, but would certainly be open-minded about it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bissonnette. The question now goes to Mr. Harlan. Mr. Harlan, what are your views regarding the retail sale of marijuana in Bucksport?
I want what's best for Bucksport. If the people of Bucksport want marijuana to be sold on the storefront, then I guess I would be supportive of that, if the people are. That being said, it would need to be regulated just the same way we regulate liquor sales, and so I guess I would defer to the people on that before I would come up with a vote.
If I may ask you a follow-up to that, what would be the mechanism by which the people would make that decision?
Public meetings.
You're not talking about a referendum, or are you?
I think the state's already said it's going to be legal, so the state has already allowed it.
Right.
So if the people of Bucksport don't want to allow it, then I'm supportive of that. But if they do, then, so trying not to give a wishy-washy answer here, but again, if the people want it, then it's another business for our town, then we'll allow our town to have that business as long as we have some sort of laws, regulations, codes, whatever, as far as similar to liquor selling establishments. I mean, we have pubs on Main Street, so I would defer to the people on that one.
Thank you for taking the follow-up.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to get clear on what you were saying. All right, the question now goes to Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Ormsby, what are your views regarding the retail sale of marijuana in Bucksport?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, but I think that it's if I wanted to, I could grow a plant on my back porch right now. And so I feel like that's another business that we could tap into. We could regulate, we could make money on. And I absolutely, positively, 100% believe that we should be able to do that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ormsby. The question now goes to Mr. Morrison. Mr. Morrison, what are your views regarding the retail sale of marijuana in Bucksport?
I'm all for it. I think that it's a good business to bring in. It's not necessarily a big problem that's gonna be a bunch of people running around killing each other and having big problems with it like that. That's not what it's all about. People are going to purchase their product and they're gonna take it home to their homes and utilize it, just like you stop in and buy a beer at the store and head for the house with it. Right now, the state has determined that they are going to take 20% tax on the sale. And they are going to give to the communities that put it in 5% tax on top of that. So any amount that comes in, we're gonna see a big amount of money, which is, we're looking for businesses in this town. I'm not gonna go buy there myself, but there are people that will. And I think it will attract people in here on their way through or to, and I think it'll be something that will be a good retail business.
Thank you, candidates, for taking those questions on marijuana, both medical and recreational. The next question shifts considerably. It's pertinent to littering and keeping the town clean. I'm going to read the question. It will go first to Mr. Key. Do you have any thoughts about ways we could apply existing laws to keep our streets and waterfronts cleaner? Littering is prohibited, but it's an ongoing problem. Plastic and cigarette litter is a big problem on the waterfront. Your thoughts, Mr. Key?
Well, unfortunately, it is an unfortunate thing, and it is a beautification issue and sanitation and what have you. I think the penalties should be a little steeper. Matter of fact, I think the penalties should be substantially steeper if somebody is caught littering. First time, maybe even second time, a warning. But, you know, if somebody, I think we have some habitual litterers in Bucksport. I walk the waterfront all the time, at least once a day. And so I think the penalties should be increased and enforced.
I'm not sure everybody heard you over there.
I think
so
the
just-
penalties should be increased and enforced, and, can you hear me now? Increased and enforced, and, because I think it is a big problem. Maybe not as much here as in some towns, but too much in town here, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Key, and thank you for increasing the volume. I keep getting signals. So, all right. The question now goes to Mr. Bissonette. Do you have any thoughts about ways we could apply existing laws to keep our streets and waterfronts cleaner? It's prohibited, but it's an ongoing problem with plastic and cigarette litter on the waterfront specifically.
Well, on the waterfront specifically, I would say looking at the new camera system that's being installed for various high-traffic areas of the waterfront, and then using that system to enforce the laws we have in place. The bigger picture for me is that you're always going to have the kids that litter and stuff like that, and even those are few and far between. I'm not down on that on generations younger than mine, but it's ultimately making people feel vested. And I don't mean to turn this into a bigger issue than what it is, but I always have felt that if people feel vested in whether it's kids coming into a school building or taxpayers, when they're walking the waterfront, if they feel vested in those types of things, they're more inclined to take care of them. And so just from a bigger community-wide perspective, if we did a better job of that or more of it, that might get after it. But enforcing the laws we have and making sure that we don't take that lightly.
Thank you, Mr. Bissonette. The question now goes to Mr. Harlan. Mr. Harlan, do you have any thoughts about ways we could apply existing laws to keep our streets and waterfronts cleaner? Littering is prohibited, but it's an ongoing problem. Plastic, cigarette litter, and particularly the problem on the waterfront, but not limited to the waterfront.
I think the only way to combat that is not going to be adding. We have ordinances in place, and I forget what they are now, but let's, for the sake of argument, say if you get caught littering on the waterfront, it's $50. So a cigarette butt you throw on the ground costs you $50, then nobody's going to throw a cigarette butt on the ground if they get caught. But how are we going to catch them? So I think the police department can certainly help with that, but they need to have the time. A regular patrolman cannot be walking up and down the waterfront looking for cigarette butts when there's so many other calls to service. But that can be addressed with maybe a waterfront detail. During the summer, we have a waterfront bike officer, which I would certainly hope helps combat the littering issue, but I think that we need to address that with a staffing. I mean, that's gonna be a staffing issue, because we can make it $1,000, but if nobody gets caught, nothing's gonna change.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan. The question now goes to Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Ormsby, do you, sir, have any thoughts about ways we could apply existing laws to keep our streets and our waterfront cleaner? Littering is prohibited, but it's an ongoing problem. Plastic and cigarette litter is a big problem, especially on the waterfront, but not limited to the waterfront.
I think first, the application of the law is how well educated people are on the law. Let me give you a quick little story. When I was in college, we'd be walking, and if you walked on the grass, within 30 seconds, you had somebody across campus yelling, "Don't walk on the grass! Don't walk on the grass!" And so you knew to jump off the grass, because it was a culture that they had built there. It's the same with this. If we build the culture that we don't litter, and we educate people about the reasons behind it, I think that education goes a long way. Does everybody believe in it? Does everybody know the law? Do we have the proper education up for people to see that? I think jacking a fine up just makes people more sneaky about it. So,
Thank you, Mr. Ormsby. The question now goes to you, Mr. Morrison. Mr. Morrison, do you have any thoughts about ways we could apply existing laws to keep our streets and our waterfronts cleaner? Littering is prohibited, but it's an ongoing problem. Plastic, cigarette litter is a big problem, especially on the waterfront, but not limited to the waterfront.
Yeah, it was wrong for somebody to throw it there, but if you see it there, pick it up and put it in the trash can.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. We're now going to go to the final question from the public. It is about conflicts of interest and council rules. I'm going to direct the question to Mr. Key, as we have been doing previously, and then take it in the same order. Here's the question, Mr. Key. Recently, there was an issue that arose concerning conflicting rules regarding council members. How would you recommend resolving this issue?
Well, I think we need to revisit what the rules are and make them a little more clear. Sometimes it seems pretty clear at the time when there is a conflict. For example, if somebody's on the council and their spouse owns a business of some sort, and there's something about that business being considered, the counselor who is married to the person certainly shouldn't advocate for it. However, you might want to know that our rules provide for that counselor to leave his or her seat on the council, go sit in the audience, and act as any citizen might. So I never quite agreed with that, but that is what's in our council rules, which is kind of surprising to me when I first saw it. That's how I feel about it. Could you hear me back there? Yes, good.
Thank you, Mr. Key. The question now goes to you, Mr. Bissonnette. Recently, there was an issue that arose concerning conflicting rules regarding the council members. How would you recommend resolving this issue, sir?
With conflicts of interest, for me, it's pretty cut and dry. Perception is reality, and perception is important. The perception of any entity, such as a town council or school committee or anything like that, is very important and should be managed. I don't attach any judgment to that, nor do I feel bad about that statement. The chair of a board or the head of a town council should make every effort to manage that perception. So to give the short answer, I think the appearance of any conflict of interest should, when given the opportunity to avoid it, should be avoided at all costs.
Thank you, Mr. Bissonnette. The question now goes to you, Mr. Harlan. Recently, there was an issue that arose concerning conflicting rules regarding council members. How would you recommend, sir, resolving this issue?
I guess the only way to maintain the integrity of what the process is as far as conflicts of interest go, then I think the person who has the conflict needs to remove themselves from that situation, period. Without knowing further what the issue was, I think that removing yourself from a conflict is obviously going to be the only way to handle that situation.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan. The question now goes to you, Mr. Ormsby. The question is, recently there was an issue that arose concerning conflicting rules regarding council members. How would you recommend resolving this issue?
I believe that there are rules and codes on the books, and as part of those rules and codes, they're set in place for certain reasons, and I believe that we have to follow them. I think down the road, if you need to look at a rule or look at a code, then that's something that you can do down the road, but I don't feel that having codes and rules for one set of people and not for others is right. So we have them on the books, we're going to use them.
Thank you, Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Morrison, the question goes to you. Recently, there was an issue that arose concerning conflicting rules regarding the council members. How would you recommend resolving this issue, sir?
Follow the codes as written. If a situation comes up that is a conflicting interest in either the codes or the charter, there are clauses in there that tell us which way we should handle the situation. In some cases, the council has the right to go ahead and change that code, and in other cases, it's such a gray area that the code doesn't need to be changed. But this particular one that is being questioned right now was a pretty much black and white. There was no gray area to it. It simply stated what it stated, and it should have been followed. The council opted to go ahead and change that rule, and that's where we stand right now.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. We're going to do one more question from the public that was submitted in writing, and then we're going to go to candidate closing statements. This question is pertinent to trash. And the question will go to Mr. Kay first. Mr. Kay, if the town's plan to send municipal trash to the new plant under construction in Hamden remains way behind schedule, when should the town seek another option, and what, sir, would that be?
I would give them another 6 months, 6 to 8 months, I think, and indeed after that, we should seek other options. And yeah, I don't know what the other options are, I'll tell you right now. But I think that plenty of towns have dealt with this issue. With a little bit of research, we can find out what's been successful with them and might be applicable to Bucksport. So, because it is a very big problem, trash removal, and it needs to be resolved, and I'm hopeful it will be.
Thank you, Mr. Key. The question now goes to Mr. Bissonette. If the town's plan to send municipal trash to the new plant under construction in Hamden remains way behind schedule, when should the town seek another option, and what would that be, sir?
I think that the council should look at this certainly within, following David, within the next 6 to 8, by the end of June of this coming year. I'm giving the same answer he did.
You're going to need to speak
Okay,
up.
but I want to elaborate on that just a little bit. I think, I've been through, again, the ADAPT plan, and I mentioned all of the plans that I've read through in preparation for tonight, and just out of general interest. And one thing that keeps sticking out is that this community is has a vested interest in its own natural resources. And so I find it disagreeable to say that as an alternative, that we're just going to take our trash and ship it to somebody else's community for them to deal with, regardless of whether we're doing that at cost. And I would say that if what's happening across the river continues to be behind schedule, that, again, budgets reflect priorities. It may be within the interests of the council and the taxpayers of this town to decide that one priority is that we are going to spend a little bit extra to get rid of our trash in a way that is friendlier to the environment and makes more long-term business sense, and just isn't turning it into a problem for someone else.
Thank you, Mr. Bissonette. Mr. Harlan, the question now goes to you. If the town's plan to send municipal trash to the new plant under construction in Hamden remains way behind schedule, when should the town seek another option, and what do you think, sir, that option would be?
Well, I think typically that when we start brainstorming sessions and committees and looking to get bids, and these things take a significant amount of time. So if we're confident that this is not going to happen or is going to be delayed for indefinitely, we have no idea, then I think sooner rather than later, we start the process, get the ball rolling, because as most people know, these things take forever to finally bring to fruition. So I think it would be important to start the process as soon as possible if we're confident that it's going to be another 6 months. Because why wait? If it does happen that they can produce for us, then great. We'll have wasted maybe a little bit of time, but at least we won't be behind the ball or behind the curve on the new plan if we need a new plan.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan. The question now goes to you, Mr. Ormsby. If the town's plan to send municipal trash to the new plant under construction in Hamden remains way behind schedule, when should the town seek another option, and what, sir, do you think that option should be?
I think what's important is that we keep our brains together and we keep working together. I say we start now figuring out what our next option is. I also, a little bit off of Mr. Bissonette, I feel like if we can find a cost-effective, environmentally friendly way to do our trash, even if it's a little bit more, that's definitely a way we should look. But I think that collectively as a group, we should decide whether we feel like we're going to be able to move forward or not with the plant in Hamden.
Thank you, Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Morrison, this goes to you. If the town's plan to send municipal trash to the new plant under construction in Hamden remains way behind schedule, when should the town seek another option, and what, sir, do you think that option should be?
First of all, it's my understanding that we're under an obligation until sometime around January. And at that time, I guess we can look at our options and weigh our options. And I think probably, as Dan just said, we probably have to start seeking some sort of option at this time, so we're prepared when January comes up. I don't think that this company that is over in Hamden has a good track record, and I'm taking that from what I've read in information I've received.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Now we're at the final, at the fourth and final segment of this candidates forum tonight. Again, the timekeeper is going to be giving you the cue cards with a 2-minute limit. We're going to ask you each to give a closing statement as to any of your thoughts about your running for election for the town council, any closing remarks that you want to make. Could be, besides vote for me, whatever else comes to mind, but you need to keep it under 2 minutes. And again, the timekeeper's over there, so just keep an eye out for that. We'll begin with you, Mr. Key.
Well, I want to thank everybody for turning out and some of the really good questions. Some of them made me think and probably rethink a few things, so thank you. The $7 million that we have in reserves, we don't have to run around trying to find ingenious ways to spend it all. There will be other rainy days, so I think some of it should, be well invested, which I think it is at the moment. For the future is always uncertain, so we don't have to spend it all. Big expenditures, councils before me we're very wise. I don't know if it went out to referenda or not, but if the council goes nuts, or if they just go nuts and suggest that we spend all kinds of money, we're limited to $250,000. That's right, in the Kathy, 250. Anything over that has to go out to referenda so the citizens can chime in and say, you guys, people really are nuts, and we're not going to let you do that. So that's good. I do want to emphasize what several said. I think the marina is a bright star, and I think it's well run by Mike Ormsby. I think that we, and I've said this before, I think that's a good place for us to put money. I think it'll bring a big return to the town. Again, I want to thank you for the turnout. I'm blowing my own horn. I am for better or worse, I am the only candidate for office that has council experience. I hope you'll permit me to carry that experience into the future, and I look forward to your thoughts and ideas. Call me anytime. Vote on November 6th. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Key. The question for closing remarks now falls to Mr. Bissonnette.
Thank you. And again, thank you for all being here this evening, given what's about to start here in 10 or 15 minutes. It's great. I'm pleased that everyone is here. I'm running for the town council, and I don't have a specific agenda. I don't hold judgment against anybody that perhaps does, but I don't have a specific agenda. Overall, I'm happy with the direction of Bucksport. I'm happy with Bucksport's leadership, including the town council as it's presently constituted. Looking forward, we know that there are decisions forthcoming that are very important for the future of Bucksport. And there are decisions that we have no idea that we'll have to make in the future. But the decisions that are forthcoming are obvious. What we do with the 274 acres down at the end of Main Street, what we do with Main Street itself, how we move that along, what we do, with the waterfront and all of Bucksport. Those decisions are very important. And I think it will be very important for those decisions to account not just for the people and businesses that we want to see come to Bucksport, but for the people and the businesses that are already here. It will be important, while capitalizing on Bucksport's history, to not let that history stand in the way as we move forward. I don't think an acceptable answer moving forward will be, that's just the way that things have always been done. That cannot be acceptable for Bucksport moving forward on its own merit. I want to be part of a town council that stays ahead of the challenges we face via strategic planning, and that a town council that employs talented and efficient administrators to make that happen. The end goal has to be that we have people who can and want to live here, and have businesses who want to operate here and can afford to do so. Thank you. I appreciate your vote on November 6th, and even if I don't have your vote on November 6th, I encourage you to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bissonnette. The question now for closing remarks falls to Mr. Harlan, please, and speak up so we can all hear you.
Okay. First, I want to say thank you, Don, and Bucksport Enterprise for allowing me to have an opportunity to do some public speaking and be terrified for the evening. Thank you, Reverend York. Appreciate you being here and doing this for us. Thank you, everyone, for spending your evening with us. Thank you to the Bucksport High School for allowing us to use their facility. I am excited at the opportunity to have a chance to serve this town again. I will listen. Those of you that know me know I'm reasonable and attentive, and I'll hear what people want in this town. I know a lot of people, and I'll do the best that I can to represent everyone's voice and move forward into the future with Bucksport. So I thank you. I thank you for listening to me ramble on this evening, and I certainly hope come November I get the opportunity to serve this town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harlan. Closing remarks will now be heard from Mr. Ormsby.
Me too. First, I want to say thank you for everybody for coming. It's a pretty exciting time in Bucksport. We have a lot ahead of us. An amazing amount of things coming at us with whole oceans, possible MMA, and a lot of infrastructure and things happening in town. I want to be there to be part of that. I want to be there to help build that as a team on the town council. I think too many times we're too separated. I think that we can really work together to start to really build something great. I want to be that driving force for economic development. I want to push that forward. I want to make sure we listen to the townspeople. Where should our money be spent? Where is our money best spent? And I want to, like I said before, work with the people that make it onto the town council. I think that we can also help improve our culture and moving our culture forward, like that we had mentioned about the trash earlier. That's something that where are we going to educate our people? Where are we going to move forward in things? We also cut back on our regulations, which will help grow businesses. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Ormsby. Mr. Morrison, closing remarks, sir.
Thank you. Again, I will echo everybody's thank yous here for everybody that has made this possible and all you people that have come and watched us. We are moving forward. We have 2 new businesses that are getting in on the industrial park out here. They are starting to work on tearing down some more of the mill, so there is some progress going on in that area. Hopefully, we'll see Whole Oceans get in here and get some things established. I will say about Whole Oceans, if they showed up here with their whole infrastructure all in place, I hope that some of those high-paying jobs go to some of the people that live here and work here and have been raised in this town. I think that the most important asset we have in this town is our people, and I think that we should keep them satisfied and happy. And one of my goals of being on the council is to see to it that that is a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I want to thank the audience for your impeccable civility and your attentiveness. I thought for certain I must be at the Elm Street Congregational Church, the way everybody was listening so well tonight. I want to commend the candidates for staying on point and for taking my little gentle proddings to speak up. I realize not all of you have God-given microphones inside. But this will be on cable several times, so if you know of people who did not see this, invite them to consult the schedule, which will be in the Bucksport Enterprise. I thank Don Holton for inviting me to be your moderator tonight. As a voting citizen of Verona Island, I wish all the candidates well in your pursuit of office. And I want to say now, this would be a good time for you to join me in thanking our candidates for being here this evening. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is concluded. Please be sure and vote.